In this video, I'll be going over the entire Chapter 4 ARG from start to finish, compiling all my ARG videos into one marathon you can watch to see every puzzle, real-life adventure, and every Chapter 4 teaser revealed all in one place while we wait for the game to finally release. Enjoy, guys. So first, as a refresher, over the past week or so, a bunch of partners started getting letters from a company called Warnbot Construction, the company responsible for building parts of Playtime Co, which when putting under UV lights revealed a number of different messages for different people, either saying central, domain, access, or net in invisible ink. And while at first the purpose of these letters was basically unknown, if you actually combine all of the words in total, you may notice it creates a working URL, central domain access.net, which when entering on a computer brings us to none other than a brand new secret website of a blank computer screen, starting what seems to be the next Chapter 4 ARG. Now, looking at what we have on this page, there is of course a blank computer screen, which we touch upon in a minute, what looks like a small tape player on the bottom right, and some pens and sticky notes on the left. And also, while browsing on the site, there is a very ominous ambience that plays in the background at all times. But looking back at the screen, you will notice there is a small area where we can type commands to the computer. However, anything we say just gives us the same exact response, access denied. So now you're probably wondering, what do we do with this and how do we get past this error message? Well, you might remember last month, we actually began to get messages from a cryptic Discord account named Playtime Co, which would tell us seemingly random things like the date in 2002, answer basic questions, and even send this image here of a bunch of computer commands seeming like they were trying to help us access this website. In fact, in one of the messages, the user says, "More instructions to follow. They will be invisible to your eyes," referencing the hidden ink letters from before that got us this website in the first place. When you receive them, we need you to run icepick.bat on c/domain/network/globals.authenticator. And so naturally, when going to the computer and trying to run whatever icepick.bat is by typing start icepick.bat, believe it or not, we successfully connect and are asked to give a target to scrape or find files in. And when listing the file address from before as a target, it loads up a bit before redirecting us to the actual website and terminal, taking us to what appears to be another blank command screen where again we could type random commands into the computer. The only issue is at first, it seems like anything you typed in this command prompt would never work. It would always error out or not give you the correct response, and it didn't really tell us much. We can only do really small things, like if we type date, for instance, it gives us whatever the current time is, but in 2002, seemingly confirming this ARG is taking place in the year 2002. However, to get to the next step of the ARG, we just simply have to ask the computer for help, which it will promptly reply saying, "If you are experiencing technical difficulties, server issues, or need to reset your permissions, please contact support@centraldomainaccess.net. And of course, when going and emailing this support contact saying whatever you want, at first it replied to everybody with the same automated message saying, "We've processed your request for help, and our IT department will reach out to you as soon as they are able. As always, we appreciate your continued work on behalf of Playtime Co and our much beloved products." And for a while, that's all we had. No clues hiding in here, no updates, nothing. That is until randomly out of nowhere, the Playtime email started responding to people with a very disturbing message. "User permissions have been reset. We are currently experiencing blank. The account is not blank. What are blank?" And after people began to receive this mysterious email, going back to the terminal page of the website, things had slightly changed, as suddenly the computer seemed to unlock and would now let us give it commands using the Playtime Co command sheet and just general computer knowledge to dig through the files of this computer, where we found a ton of new hidden teasers. Now, this is where things get extremely complicated. So to simplify, just like how you can use a file explorer to find files on your computer and look through folders, you can do the exact same on this website by using the command ls to list the current folders of a computer and CD, which stands for change directory, to enter that directory or folder. So for instance, when first opening the terminal and typing ls, it lists the C drive of the computer, which we can enter by typing cdc:, taking us into the drive the same way how you'd click a folder on a computer. Then when listing the files in the C drive, there is one directory called domain that we can enter by typing cd domain, taking us to the next folder. And when again listing the folders in the domain directory, we get 4 more paths that all lead to different things. And to keep a long story short, because this video could be hours if I tried to explain every single path, after spending some time digging through every directory path, some of them led to dead ends and don't go deeper. Like when going from C to domain to desktop, it says there are no files inside, suggesting more stuff could get added to it later. And sometimes you will find secrets, like when taking the path C, domain, then applications, inside we get the text reading start pcss.exe, which when repeating on the terminal takes us to a CCTV website with 3 live cameras, all of which for now are unfortunately blocked or glitched out, but chances are they will open up as the ARG ages, so don't forget that. But along with that secret, while digging, we were also able to discover 7 brand new teaser images, all of which are seemingly teasers for chapter 4 and hide a ton of secrets about the upcoming game and its lore, so let's break it down. The first image we see here is from what looks like a flyer from Playtime Co reading, "Ring ring, calling all whiz kids, smarty pants, quick-witted thinkers, and brainiacs. It's Elliot Ludwig on the phone. Playtime Co, the beloved and world-renowned maker of toys, is proud to introduce the Young Geniuses program shown here. Never one to stand idle as the future passes him by, our generation-defining inventor and architect wishes to embrace the science of the future alongside, well, you. Join Elliot Ludwig as the best and brightest young minds seek to tackle the universe's most unanswerable questions. Experiment, learn, and above all, have fun. If you believe you are up to snuff, simply fill out the application on the back of the flyer before it kind of cuts off. A series of tests will follow. Vetting period will consist of 6 to 9 weeks of careful blank. Please list a mailing address for all future communication." So basically, this flyer is a way to advertise Playtime Co's new Young Geniuses program, which seems to be a way for Playtime Co to spot out gifted children and work with them in some way, which we will discuss a little bit later. For now, the second teaser given to us here shows a list of some employees' names saying Dr. Charlie Moff, who prioritizes in anesthesiology, Dr. Bruno White with an impressive list of published papers, who is also known as the scientist in the Chapter 3 VHS tapes responsible for taking the children from play care for experimentation.
This week, Dr. White here has selected our very own Samuel Lee.
Next, there's a crossed out unreadable name described as unavailable, Dr. Camille Russell with no description, Benjamin Rutherford, who they say dropped out of med school, a problem child with unresolved parental issues, tired of paying for fancy blank school with daddy's money. Maybe I'm nosy, but only within reason. Which really makes me wonder who Benjamin is and why the writers seem to hate them so much. Next, we see Dr. Evelyn something and Dr. Carmine McCabe, who have no descriptions. Then Dr. Harley Sawyer, who is circled and reads many years of practical experience, ABNS certified, which Google says is a certification given to high-quality neurological surgeons, but I'm not sure. There's Dr. Anthony Carrizals and Dr. Sanji Blank, but as we said, Harley Sawyer is the one circled, with the writer noting, with great effort and resources expended, namely travel time and the cost of a caffeine addiction, I've gathered a complete list as requested. With the little information available from the unset, I think that says, picking up the trail of these individuals was difficult. Regardless, you keep me on retainer for a reason. Here's your list. Yours, Lockhart, which is a name you might recognize as Jared Lockhart, who was the detective responsible in the Chapter 3 ARG for looking into how Theodore, the child who ended up being turned into Catnap tried to escape play care with the prototype. And this time, they seem to be delegated with making a list of some kind of employees, but what could this list be for? Well, in my opinion, it seems like it has something to do with possibly finding some people who are qualified to work on the experiments. Since most of the people listed here are doctors with some kind of high-level qualification who could be considered smart, and we could see here they ended up picking Harley Sawyer, who obviously ended up creating the Bigger Bodies Initiative. So in my opinion, I think this list was gathered to document everyone's qualifications who worked at the factory, and was their way of trying to find someone to lead the charge and help with making the experiments, which Harley happened to fit the mold of best, judging from the sheet. Moving on to the third teaser, we have an extremely blurry notebook sheet that says, Sawyer, obviously referencing Harley Sawyer, is quick to remind us that this whole blank is one bad day away from a catastrophe blank, or possibly dead. We take the work seriously, and I don't think blank, safety of our coworkers, or the integrity of blank. Still, it's become somewhat of an inside joke blank, or we'll spill a cup of coffee in the break room blank. One bad day, am I right? The other would blank. Macabre, possibly. I'd argue it beats the blank. I just hope Sawyer doesn't find out about blank like that. The man would be livid. Signed off from a busted up name we can't read. So a lot of pieces of the letter are missing, but from what I can interpret, this appears to be some kind of a personal letter of somebody talking about how strict Harley Sawyer was, saying that any mistake they made could destroy the company, likely referring to accidentally leaking the secrets of the experiments, since that was his department after all, and how they joke about how spilling a cup of coffee or something small would destroy the entire company. But it shows just how strict the higher ups were and had to be for the sake of security. In the next teaser, we have what looks like some kind of a document from Playtime Co, but it's completely corrupted and nothing is visible here. And while for now there isn't much to say about this document, we know that anytime the developers give us something, whether we need it now or later, it's almost always important for something. So there's definitely some kinds of secrets hiding in this document. We just haven't really been able to figure it out yet. In the next teaser, we get a photo of what looks like some kind of an eyeball, and what makes this one interesting is in the glitched part down at the bottom here, YouTuber It's Just Jord noted that if you take the bottom of this section and put it through a spectrogram, which basically just turns an image into audio, which sometimes can hide secrets, it sounds almost exactly like a phone bell ringing. Now, I don't know if this is just a coincidence, since I tried this with other random glitchy parts of the other teasers and it produced a somewhat similar sound. I don't know. Maybe it's meant to be hiding something, but let me know your thoughts down below. Next, and possibly most interesting of them all, we have this teaser, which shows a bunch of stuff glitched out that you can't really make heads or tails of. But as you've probably already noticed, there seems to be some kind of faint red silhouette being portrayed in this image. One that looks very similar to the silhouette of something like Catnap from Chapter 3, with a big smile and on all fours with a tail. However, obviously, we know this isn't Catnap because we kind of already saw what happened with him. But judged from the presumed silhouette having a very similar design to Catnap and some of the other smiling critter bigger bodies, I wonder if this is actually meant to be teasing one of the nightmare critters getting a bigger body in the game, since they are basically just a smiling critters redesign, and so imaginably their bigger bodies would look very similar to the smiling critters. Maybe this is meant to be a bigger body of someone like Baba Chops, because they've been the flagship critter who's been on all of the promotional material. But otherwise, I don't really know what it could be. It's possible it might not even be a new character, and I'm just completely overthinking it, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Then moving on to the last teaser, but definitely not the least, we have an acceptance letter from the Youth Geniuses program we saw in the first teaser that reads, "Dear candidate, my name is Elliot Ludwig, and I write to you today with some momentous news. You applied, you tested in your field of expertise, expertise, you waited, and now the time has finally come. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege to announce your acceptance into our Young Geniuses program. It is my greatest hope that you, alongside your colleagues, will accomplish what those before you could never dream of. It will be an exciting venture, and I hope that you feel a bit of that excitement yourself. Great and miraculous things happen when minds such as yours come together. Directions for your lodging and instruction on what to bring will soon follow this message, but for now, revel in the idea that the future, your future, is now closer to you than ever before. Sincerely, Elliot Ludwig. Now, this brings up the Geniuses program from earlier once again and shows what happens when you actually get accepted inside of it. Now, to me, this is really odd. I'm super curious on what this program is meant to be because honestly, we have never seen any mention of it anywhere in the factory before. Even Playcare, which didn't get introduced until chapter 3, at the very least had mentions back in chapter 1 with the adoption program poster here. So it's weird that we haven't seen this Young Geniuses program before. We can see by the logo that it's from a very, very long time ago. So it's possible, maybe before Playtime Co's closure, that something had happened to the program causing them to have to take it down, which could be why they're showing and introducing it to us now. But pushing the continuity aside for a minute, this also makes me wonder, what exactly could this program have been for? We know everything in Playtime Co has a specific purpose, so why would they be reaching out to try and find a bunch of gifted children and bring them to the factory? Well, I think I have a dark and pretty twisted idea, because we have already seen how the children have been farmed in Playcare to be eventually turned into the large, bigger body toys for manual labor, and I wonder if this program was meant to be the exact opposite, where they could be taking geniuses from the outside world and then bringing them into the factory, possibly to help study the experiments and figure out how they worked, since we saw even up until Playtime Co closed that they could never make a perfect experiment like Poppy, and all of the other experiments had certain flaws, whether that be not being able to speak, not liking the employees, or being too smart like the prototype. And so perhaps this was their way to try and find young talent who maybe could, especially since the employees were imaginably getting older as the factory aged, and would need younger, smarter people to fill in their shoes. I'm not exactly sure, maybe that's a stretch, but that's my only guess for now. For a tiny bit of added context before getting into the next ARG video, in between these updates, somebody found that this image, when editing the hex code, would remove the glitchy layer, and underneath we see the body of a dinosaur with a piano head, which people are calling Pianosaurus. So in case you see me mention them, that's what I'm talking about. So recently, the Chapter 4 ARG started on a website called centraldomainaccess.net, bringing us to a computer database which has over time been giving us teasers and clues that have slowly updated over the past few days. And most recently, the website updated itself again, where now going onto the terminal and typing recover into the computer brings us to a brand new area on the terminal asking us for a password to unlock whatever was in this command, and oh boy, is unlocking it going to be a journey. But putting that to the side for a second, in my last ARG video, we also discovered some camera systems that at the time were completely shut down and didn't really help us with the ARG at all. However, fast forward to today, now when going onto the cameras and listening to the audio inside of them, they've updated it to make a very interesting noise. Now, if you've done previous ARGs before, you probably recognize this really high-pitched, annoying noise on these cams as being a spectrogram puzzle, which basically allows us to take this audio and put it into a software which visualizes it as an image, sometimes hiding secrets. And when doing this with the 3 camera systems on the website and their audios, we get some very interesting results, showing on all 3 2 sets of coordinates somewhere on the image, what looks in the background like some kinds of trees or woods, and a message that says see you there, which when doing this with each camera gives us 3 different sets of coordinates. And what makes these coordinates interesting is when searching them up in real life on Google, they led to actual places around America. The first one led to a park in Missouri, the second one led to Burbank, California, and the third one led to a place in Portland, Maine, with the weird trees you can kind of see in the background being actual pictures of the locations we needed to go to. Now, conveniently for me, I live in Missouri, the same state as the first coordinates. So when we first discovered this, I instantly went chasing after them. And after a little bit of a drive through the state, I was led to a park in Arnold, Missouri, which after following a trail and eventually reaching the exact coordinates 30 feet or so into the woods, I was met with a very interesting sight. A mysterious unaccompanied lunchbox in the middle of the woods. And upon opening it, I was met with something even weirder. What appears to be a Huggy doll torn apart and surrounded by a bunch of yarn, which trust me will matter a ton later in the video. And while at first this seemed to be all that was hiding inside of here, when feeling inside of the Huggy plush, something felt weird about it, almost like there was something hiding inside of it that we needed to find. And so naturally I brought the plush home to do a live stream where I performed surgery on the Huggy to find what was inside of it, which when doing so revealed two different sets of balled up paper that when unscrambling ended up showing a couple of different documents titled Game Station Test Subject Assessment Forms, which were used in the game station as we saw in chapter 2 to grade the children in play care on how well they performed in the games to test their skills for making them into experiments. And the first one I got here read subject name Quinn Navidson, proctor name Mateo Lata, and the assigned toy Yarnaby, revealing to us there is a new character coming to the game, of course under the name Yarnaby, and we can assume they are somehow related to Yarn, judged from the Huggy plush in the ARG, which was literally covered in it, and of course their name. In musical memory, out of 5, Quinn got a 3, saying several mistakes but finished with roughly part-time. In Huggy Wuggy, he got a 2, saying Quinn's awareness and response time leaves a lot to be desired, frequently miss their target. Then in statues, he got a 3, saying completed the obstacle course within expected time but lost once and was instructed to restart, which shows that the child Quinn was a very average child in terms of the game station grades. Nothing special, nothing terrible. However, something changed in the second document hiding inside Huggy, also about Quinn Davidson, with the proctor this time being Harley Sawyer, and this time in the reassessment they got a 1 on musical memory, saying was unreceptive to the trial, no apparent comprehension of the rules or goals, unable to complete the game, and no attempts seem to be made. Next on Huggy Wuggy, he got a 4, saying was able to outperform the previous run through despite not being able to properly handle a GrabPack, bit the heads off several of the stuffed toys used for the game, which is really weird. And then in statues they got a perfect 5, saying completed the obstacle course in under 20 seconds, ran back into the course when handlers attempted to remove him from the room, hid in the foam pit, and could not be located for 15 minutes. So in this assessment, besides musical memory, Quinn did much better, at least in total, but how come? What changed? Well, on the image we can also see a sticky note here from Harley that says can't find 1166's damn files, seemingly giving us an experiment number for Yarnaby at 1166, meaning they were actually created before toys like Mommy Longlegs and Catnap. Interestingly enough, IT needs to get more organized. We need some sort of recover command, which you might recognize was the command we saw in the computer database that was password locked at the start of this video. And when guessing around a bit with this passcode, putting in Yarnaby's experiment number 1166 as the password, it would actually end up working, and upon entering it, 3 mysterious files would be added to our computer: an audio transcript, a prison report, and a weekly checkup. And starting with the audio transcript, it shows a call between Quinn, the child from the game station reports, and Dr. Harley Sawyer that takes place after the first test we read before, but before the second one, reading, Dr. Sawyer, Quinn, might I ask what you're doing? Making my toys prettier, Dr. Sawyer. And you'd think they'd be prettier without heads? I think so. Their heads get in the way of their bodies, but if you put Dolly's head from this body over here onto this one, see, he moves all better now. I do see. I'm sure this is no surprise to you, Quinn, but your counselors are concerned. They perceive your behavior, what you're doing right now, to be troublesome. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you agree with their assessment? I don't know that word. I just want to make things prettier. Yes, don't we all? You want to know what I think, Quinn? What's that? I think you hold back a lot of yourself. I think you mess up to make others have lesser expectations of you. And I think this, your behavior, is just a result of seeing the world a little differently. There's nothing wrong with that. I think you're smart. I think you're capable. And I think in your next test, you will give all of yourself to achieve a good result. result. Do you know why? Why? Because I see you, and not the version of you others want to. I see the real Quinn Davidson, and believe me this, I want the same prettier world you see. So next week, when you have another go at the game station, I'll be watching, and I want to see all of the real Quinn on display. Do we have a deal? Okay, good, don't disappoint me. So in this, we see Harley talking to Quinn about, for one, his weird obsession with taking off the heads of the toys around him, which really makes me wonder when he would inevitably become Yarnaby or Experiment 1166, what that could say about his character when we presumably end up meeting them in game. But they also mention how Quinn was seemingly intentionally making himself look dumb to try and look a little bit less smart to the people around him, which Harley sees and tells him to instead try his best, leading to the much better score in the second game station assessment. And this makes me wonder if perhaps Quinn was smarter than the rest of the children, and possibly knew about the experiments going on in the factory, since while we don't know why they would intentionally mess up the game station games, I can only theorize that maybe he knew that the goal of the games was to try and find the best candidates for experiments, and so he chose to play dumb on purpose to try and avoid experimentation. Something Harley saw in him and manipulated out of him to get him to try his best later, leading him to become whoever Yarnaby is. But moving on to the next document, we see a prisoner profile for 1166 or Yarnaby, which takes place after they were presumably turned into a toy who was assigned there for a pending reason, and has a blacked out photo which reads, characteristic for these early ilk, does that say? 1166 demonstrates an acute lack of higher cognitive function. Complex reasoning, speech, problem solving, and greater introspection all appear either severely limited or altogether non-functional. Physically, it's what it needs to be, strong, agile, swift, and yet I'd hoped for a greater mind behind it. However, 1166 displays an odd sense of loyalty to a select few security staff who nauseatingly feel some kind of sympathy for it, indicative of domesticated dogs and cats. This means its will can be bent. It feels, it fears. I believe this is our first sign of progression, that our processes, while admittedly still rudimentary, are showing us where more work needs to be done, and that improvements are possible. Still, 1166, which is crossed out but obviously is Yarnaby, is an odd, funny little creature. The way it sits in the corner and watches blank was taken seriously. I got a good laugh out of it. It amuses me. Conclusion, I'm going to isolate it. It'll have contact with no one but me. Considering my importance to the project, it's doubly important that I'm properly protected at all times. And besides, I might get a good laugh or two at the pathetic little sounds it makes. By the time I'm done with it, I'll be its entire world. It'll know nothing else. Signed, Dr. Harley Sawyer. So like mentioned, this paper takes place after Quinn the child became Yarnaby or Experiment 1166, and clearly the character has a few different strengths and weaknesses. Its strengths are that it's physically really strong and powerful, but its weaknesses are that it's not very smart and often easily becomes attached to the security staff, akin to a loyal dog, which Harley planned to exploit here by locking himself in the room with Yarnaby for an extended period of time, hoping they would become obsessively attached to him as well. This is really odd because we mentioned earlier that Quinn was seemingly smart and Harley seemed to like their intelligence based on the call logs. However, as Harley mentioned, he was hoping for something more out of the mind behind Quinn's bigger body. Also on multiple occasions referring to his speech as sounds rather than words, seeming like he wasn't even smart enough to speak any basic English, indicating that the experiment in some way degraded Quinn's mind when being turned into Yarnaby and became almost dependent or attached to the employees, not really being able to think or speak for itself. Something Harley wanted to take advantage of here, trying to make Yarnaby dependent on him, presumably to make himself more powerful. But the story concludes in the final document, which takes place in 1994, where they also confirmed they were created in August of 1990, which is interesting. Written as a weekly checkup with Yarnaby 4 years after their creation, reading, observations. This report will ultimately serve as an echo of those prior. I report no change in the subject. He eats little, lazes about in a cell, and performs substandard on all physical tests. With the removal of his master, who we can assume is Harley Sawyer, 1166 appears lost. Despite Sawyer's apathy, the subject formed an attachment of sorts. Without whatever sense of comfort or stability that brought him, his motivation has been sapped. He sits, stares, listens, and only acts with aggression whenever I approach him. He truly just doesn't care anymore. Conclusions: the mind of an animal does not process grief in the same way as people. If a dog's master dies, it waits around at the same place and wanders where the scent is strong, thinking someday its master has to return. A hole forms in their life, and without higher processing, they must walk around it forever or simply allow themselves to fall in. But 1166 is not fully an animal, even if his mannerisms and behavioral characteristics suggest as much. Whatever boy is deep inside, I think he's scared, broken down by isolation over too long a time for us to salvage much from what's still there. He was designed for one purpose and one purpose only, a design made flawed by paranoia and ego, in that he's a failure by design. Somebody above my pay grade can decide what to do with him. For now, he can sulk and spend his days wishing for a master that, I guarantee you, didn't care for him at all. Signed, Dr. Carmine McCabe, who was one of the doctors seen in the ARG teaser last week where they were looking for people for some secret project before eventually deciding on Harley Sawyer. And plus, this checkup is stamped with this weird symbol we've seen everywhere now. Still not really much of a known reason for it, but it's important to remember for future teasers. But so now, this document tells us a few things. For one, Harley Sawyer was in fact successful at making Yarnaby attached to him, but for some reason ended up having to leave, causing Yarnaby to become completely dysfunctional. I originally assumed Harley had died because they had mentioned before in the Catnap VHS tape in chapter 3 that Harley was out for an unknown reason.
Normally I'd have Dr. Sawyer do this, but he's out, let's say.
However, in the Poppy orientation notebook, Harley was set to work with PW in May of 1995, and this document here was from 1994, so it's impossible Harley died, and it seemed like something else happened to him causing him to need to leave. Possibly this document we mentioned earlier that he was chosen for was meant to be some kind of classified bigger body experiment project that forced him to have to leave the main light of Playtime Co to go work on something secretive, causing Yarnaby, who is now dependent on Harley Sawyer, to be devastated. And plus, in the document, they also mentioned that originally Yarnaby was made for some very specific purpose, which is true with all the other bigger bodies, but they don't say what that purpose was and simply say the design was flawed by paranoia and ego, causing Yarnaby to be deemed a failure. So they clearly have some kind of a purpose, we just don't know what. Plus, it's also weird that Dr. McCabe claimed Yarnaby was only aggressive towards themselves, and they are a character who has never been seen in game. We don't really know anything about their personality, so I'm curious on what they might have done to make Yarnaby so angry. I don't know, but speaking overall, while these documents are really cool, and it seems like Yarnaby is 100% going to be the main antagonist of chapter 4 because they've marketed this character more than anything else thus far, we are still left with a lot of unanswered questions, like what will Yarnaby look like, what kind of animal will they be, and what will their purpose in chapter 4 be? And as we mentioned and saw earlier in the video, we know Yarnaby is going to be made of yarn in some sort of way, but I've also seen a lot of people pointing out that on multiple occasions in these documents, they refer and compare Yarnaby to being a domesticated animal, specifically most of the time a dog, which could be interpreted literally like maybe the toy version of Yarnaby is a dog made of yarn, but this was all more than likely just a metaphor and doesn't really tell us anything, and rather it seems like they left him super vague on purpose, so we'll have to wait for future teasers. One more bit of added context before getting into the next video. In between these, the chapter 4 Yarnaby trailer ended up releasing, which gave us our first full look at some chapter 4 locations like the prison, caves, and of course the next villain Yarnaby, who's important for the rest of the ARG. So for a while now, we've been waiting for some updates on the Chapter 4 ARG ever since we got a new trailer, and overall haven't heard much from the developers. That is until recently, out of nowhere, the Playtime Co Discord account in the Poppy Playtime server, which has frequently messaged us clues for the ARG in past updates, randomly came back and returned saying, "Please excuse the silence, needed to relocate. We have an important message. It's too dangerous to share over this channel. We will try another way." before returning a few minutes later saying, "Message delivered. Can't say specifics, but we are making noise." And this last message here gives us an idea on what to do next, as when going back over into the famous ARG website, specifically on the CCTV camera section, we have notably in the past used the audio in these CCTVs to find all sorts of other puzzles and clues before, so it wouldn't take long for people to notice that suddenly the audios on these CCTVs would change, making some new interesting noises on one of the cams. It sounds like some kinds of drums or taps, which made people quickly realize that this may be some kind of tap code, which is an encryption method where we are given a graph of the alphabet in a 5x5 format, and somebody can tap a certain number of times to equate to a letter on the graph. For instance, if I wanted to say hi via tap code, first I would tap twice, then 3 times to spell H, then tap twice again, and tap 4 more times to get I. And when doing this with all of the taps on the cameras, it spells out the phrase, "Find Sawyer evidence zip," seeming to be referencing Harley Sawyer. And when going back to the terminal and typing recover, a command we've used in previous ARGs to download hidden files, we are again brought to a password locked website. However, now when using the tap code message and typing the password sawyerevidence.zip, the password works and the computer downloads 3 variations of files under the same names that hide some big secrets. So when opening all of the files from the terminal, it reveals what looks like some kind of images that are completely scrambled up and don't really say much. However, you might have already been able to spot that the images appear to be split up into little scrambled up grids, which, to make a long story short, can be rotated around a bit using Photoshop or some other editing software. And after a little bit of mixing and mashing, we are able to create 3 brand new teasers, showing on each what appears to be a bunch of documents all shredded up and thrown around the desk from different angles. Now, you're probably wondering, how are we going to fix up these destroyed documents? And the answer is as simple as going through every single image, picking out dozens upon dozens of little pieces, and building them all together individually to try and make some kind of full document. Now, I'm not joking when I say this puzzle is extremely difficult to solve. I recently spent 3 hours on stream trying to do this and was only able to fully solve one of them. So after hours upon hours of me and other fans trying to uncover the documents, we couldn't even find all of them yet. But so far, we have been able to uncover 6 separate documents that reveal a bunch of things. The first one here shows an incident report labeled as confidential, taking place at some point in 1993 with the employee name Brendan something in the tourism department, likely being the people involved with the Playtime Co tours, assuming this is correct. And the incident details read, "It's a bit hard to remember everything that happened. It's like my mind is all jumbled up when I think about it. Like I can't think about it without being there again in that moment. Still, I'll try to write everything I remember. I guided my appointed blank. We made our way redacted. Above, we usually have a blank. The group was big. I think those at the back dragged behind. Halfway across, I heard redacted screaming. Then every blank. He redacted, the mines redacted, but I tried also redacted. I don't think anyone heard me, and nobody heard anything over the alarms. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a minute or 2. Incident causes: bad safety equipment, bad parenting, stupid kid. Notes: please, whatever happens, you can't let all this come back on me. Whatever you want from me, take it. Just don't tell anyone it was me. I'm just a kid, man. I have a future in everything, and I can't have this hang over me. Tell the parents, tell the news, tell everyone it wasn't my fault." So in this, while we don't see the whole thing, a large part of it is redacted, we hear about what appears to be an incident with someone named Brendan having something happen during a tour involving a child, which he panically blamed on the child, the parents, and possibly faulty safety equipment. And judged from from the panic of the employee who begged for people to not give them fault, along with all of the reported alarm sounds, it sounds like there was some kind of serious accident involving a child getting injured or worse, and Brendan was worried about this ruining the trajectory of his life. This incident is something we've never seen before anywhere in the game, but clearly it's going to be important to the chapter. I don't even know what it could have actually been. So I'm very confident that in chapter 4 we'll learn more about what happened to this kid, especially since they seem to mention mines here, and we know there are caves in chapter 4, so something could have happened relating to the caves in some way. The next and possibly most interesting document of all of them shows a letter from Leith Pierre to Harley Sawyer reading, "Dear Dr. Sawyer, first introductions. My name is Leith Pierre. I'm the head of innovation at the Playtime Co factory. You are Dr. Harley Sawyer, a neuroscientist with quite a little reputation. Not a major player in your field, no, but someone with ambition and big ideas, somebody looking to get ahead." Now, I know the natural next question: why is the head of a successful toy business reaching out to little old me? Well, for you, I have the project of a lifetime. It took a little digging, but I know you were once part of Elliot's Young Geniuses program, making you uniquely qualified for what I'm about to ask from you. However, given that a letter is far from the proper place to convey this information, let me extend to you an invitation. January 15th, 1990. Meet me at the Playtime Co factory. Believe me, you'll know when you see me. This is your way to get ahead, Dr. Sawyer, the opportunity you've been waiting for. I know you'll make the right decision. Sincerely, Leith Pierre, head of innovation. So this document appears to take place in 1990, where we could see that Leith Pierre had taken over for Elliot Ludwig as the factory owner, at least according to himself. And as we saw, Harley Sawyer wasn't a scientist of Playtime Co or anything at this point. However, he was a prodigy brought up through the Playtime Co Young Geniuses program, an older program we learned about in some previous ARG updates, presumably held back when Harley was a child, that served to spot out smart children to possibly scout them out for the future. Something we see here when we learn Harley was actually once a child at Playtime Co and was studied all the way into adulthood, leading up to Leith needing him for a special meeting, likely building up to the start of the Bigger Bodies initiative. And this also finally explains this document from earlier in the ARG, where we see a bunch of scientists and other smart people assessed for some kind of a project before they picked Harley Sawyer, which was likely some list of the young geniuses they scouted out years past, and when needing somebody to help out with experiments, they found Dr. Harley Sawyer. So that is a very interesting twist, and I wonder if we will learn more about this program and his involvement with it in the coming months. Next, we actually get to see some letters from Harley working on a bunch of different experiments that reveal more than I think anybody was expecting, starting with experiment 1015, labeled under special projects, who was made for play care, reading, "Our understanding of neural reactivation is in part or whole wrong. Systemic tissues seemed initially promising, but yielded no results. Subject shows blank brain activity of any kind. Another failure. I've blank innovation blank. After all, we are dealing with a field so new it has no blank." So the first one here is a failed experiment designed for play care 1015, which a lot of people have theorized could be referencing the infamous Bobby Bear Hug Bigger Body showcased in the books, which was also supposed to be in play care but ended up being a massive failure. Next, we see one for experiment 1026, also for play care, that reads, "Subject was alive for a total of 45 minutes, of which only 3 were in anything resembling a conscious state. Upon first signs of awakening, 1026 sat upright as if startled by something. They stared blankly at the other end of the observation room. Of course, assisting staff rushed in, checking the equipment and asking them a variety of questions. 1026 answered none of them, but directed their gaze at whoever was talking, and was even able to track a moving object, a staff member's index finger, when prompted. Subject then slowly laid blank and closed their eyes. After a few minutes, blood pressure began falling extremely rapidly and 1026 expired. Attempts to resuscitate were not successful." So this document shows another failure, 1026, also dedicated to play care, who we, like the previous one, have never seen in game and have no idea on really who they are. But while they were deemed to be a failure as well, they did noticeably improve from 1015, who had no reported brain function, while this experiment would respond to commands and, despite dying early, held promise. promise. The next experiment, and most interesting one by far, is Experiment 1160, who has been heavily theorized to be Boxy Boo after they showed up in a previous ARG with the same description as him. And like the rest, he is interestingly tagged for play care reading. No longer must we be tied to the size or blank of our test subjects. 1160 represents an entirely new approach to the project and is proof that blank. He will be the first of this new initiative, first of these bigger bodies. If we continue to improve procedures, there will be another benefit as well. Leith and his money men will be placated, I think that says. They will have their investments and see money saved, and I will be able to continue on my work. Promising, very promising indeed. So for one, this does confirm 1160 is Boxy since he was the first bigger body. We already knew that. Even confirming he was originally at least tagged with being in the play care. I don't really know why though. And two, what makes this document interesting is it's the only one tagged for the bigger bodies initiative. All the others are just tagged with their respective experiment numbers, and the big breakthrough with Boxy seemed to actually be his size. Being able to make him big and craft him to be larger, not limited to the small sizes of the actual toys, allowed them to fully realize his potential and survive since they were working with bigger parts, unlike the other experiments who we can assume were much smaller and never really made it out alive for that reason. Also kind of disproving that Bobby Bear Hug theory from earlier. This would explain why we see so many dead small toys throughout the factory, especially since they only had this breakthrough 1,160 experiments in, while the bigger bodies seem to stick around forever because they were easier to build and maintain without the limitations of size. In this document, we also see Harley talk about the other financial benefits of using these toys for work, which we've seen be true with basically every other bigger body seen in the game thus far. Then following this, we got another document showing a letter that reads, "If you show up with another ham sandwich with blank wrapped in pita, I really might just kill you. Ha, blank. As seriously as you usually do. Though I bet you Sawyer, I think that says blank, show. I don't think you were around at the time that blank sweet pickles. Figures. Can't have anything sweet or blank in any way. Point is, if you find yourself taking his lunch order at blank, pickles if you want to keep your head on your shoulders. Blank, one bad pickle away from blowing the whole place blank. Sorry, yeah, anyway, lunch. Honestly, grab me anything blank. American cheese and pita. I was serious about that. Blank, gotta make some jokes and take some jokes to keep a blank place." So this one is super cut off for some reason, but the general gist shows someone who worked in a cafeteria, likely some kind of Playtime Co cafe, warning another one about Harley Sawyer, who was specifically super strict about his pickles during his lunch order. This one is a little bit sillier, but I think it's meant to represent how strict Harley was and how everyone had to constantly be on their best behavior when the higher ups were around, which I find super interesting. Kind of like all of these documents, these are some absolutely massive reveals, some of the biggest reveals we've ever had in the game. And plus, as we said earlier in this video, this isn't even everything. There are still some documents in these bunches of files that haven't been solved yet, like this weird brain scan looking thing spread about, this news article looking document, and whatever this drawn out diagram is. So we've been waiting for some new updates on chapter 4 for the past week or so, and while at first it seemed minor, randomly the developers would tweet out saying, "You should totally wishlist Poppy Playtime chapter 4 on Steam, or so I heard." A meaningless promo directing us to the Steam page. However, people pointed out that now when looking at the page, a new mysterious message appears in the description reading, "Start subsys login," short for subsystem login, which sounds like a computer command of some sort. So when naturally going to the chapter 4 ARG computer website where we've been entering these commands and typing this exact message, suddenly we are brought to what looks like some kind of login page asking us for a username. So now with no more clues, what do we do next? While pushing the username to the side for a moment, a few minutes after this mob tweet, they also tweeted under it saying, "Wait, there's a mysterious communicator in the official Discord," referencing how when going to the Discord, the infamous Playtime Co account used multiple times in previous ARG videos, ended up making a return, first saying hello, then we believe you may have been compromised. Were you aware of this? Followed by someone in the chat asking who has compromised us and what do they know? Garnering the response, you seem to have caught the system's attention. Your place in it may not be safe. To your second question, we don't know, interestingly enough. Then another user asked what actions need to be taken for this, to which they responded, give us a few moments, we will get back to you. And a few moments later, they returned saying, the domain has taken the IT email back, but you may be able to use that to your advantage, seemingly referencing the IT support email found earlier in the ARG website that was used in previous updates, which they claimed had been compromised by a third party. And so naturally, after they said this, when going in and emailing the support email again, asking it some questions about Playtime Co and their identity, we get some very interesting results. So first, we needed to figure out the identity of the person who took over the email, and to do this, somebody asked about the most recently revealed Chapter 4 villain, Yarnaby, or Experiment 1166, asking, do you know 1166? Does he know you? Do you know me? What do you want? Which the account actually ended up replying to saying, pathetic, amusing but pathetic, referencing Yarnaby. And this is a massive tell on who this is, because in a recent Chapter 4 ARG document, we learned that Yarnaby, when made into an experiment, was deemed to be a failure, and creator Harley Sawyer, the one who created all of the monsters in the factory, including Yarnaby, was hoping his creation would have, quote, a greater mind behind it, but also said in Yarnaby's prison log that he wanted to try isolating Yarnaby to see what would happen, claiming that even if it failed, he might get a good laugh or two at the pathetic little sounds it makes, even claiming it amused him. Almost the exact verbiage used in this email here describing Yarnaby, making it pretty clear that the people who took over this email were either Harley Sawyer himself or someone related to Harley. Somebody even confirmed this by asking the email about its thoughts on pickles, since in a recent Chapter 4 document, we learned that Harley was very strictly against the use of certain pickles on his sandwich for some reason, which garnered the response vile, showing his disgust, basically confirming our suspicions. So now, knowing that the email was taken over by someone related to or written by Harley, it gave us the chance to ask him some very important questions about Playtime Co. What I first found interesting is somebody asked the account what they knew about experiments 1015 and 1026, the two experiments found in the last ARG update where we saw Harley Sawyer made a breakthrough after both of these experiments failed for being too small, and he realized if he created the toys as bigger bodies like Boxy Boo, they could actually survive as full living creatures, which when asking about this study garnered the response saying they were a necessary part of the process, showing that Harley didn't really have much regret for what he did to the experiments, who were human by the way, in the name of progress. Next, on a little bit of a tangent, someone wanted to ask about Huggy Wuggy, simply saying what happened to Huggy, getting the response from them, experiment 1070, which is a typo, they meant 1170, Huggy's experiment number, obedient, patient perhaps, temporary LOS with surface will restore. Now there's a number of ways this message could be viewed, none of which are really all that solid. First, we saw the emailer talk about Huggy being obedient and patient, both traits Huggy was described with in previous chapters, as he, unlike all of the other experiments, actually listened to the employee's orders, but it's the last part here, temporary LOS with surface will restore, that's super ambiguous and confusing. What does LOS mean? What will restore? Well, I've seen some people theorize LOS could have meant like line of sight, and this could be referencing something like the Huggy breakout tape, where he escaped the factory and he left from their camera's line of sight, but they eventually caught him and restored him back into the factory. Or if you want to be a little bit more ambitious, this could also be referencing us losing the line of sight of Huggy after he fell down the pit in Chapter 1, and them saying will restore could be referencing the popular theory that Huggy Wuggy could have fallen down the pit into the prison, and then might have met up with Yarnaby, who could have repaired him from all of his injuries, since we saw in a previous ARG update that we found a Huggy plush that was stitched up with, conveniently, Yarnaby's yarn. Next, somebody wanted to ask about Poppy, like the Poppy doll, saying, what do you know about Poppy? Which was interestingly followed up with, her path leads to ruin, which seems to quite obviously be teasing to us that Poppy, of course, can't be trusted. And as many of us have thought, Poppy is likely planning some kind of betrayal towards us, which we are being warned of here. Somebody tried emailing the account posing as the prototype saying, "I am the prototype, you can trust me," which the account replied saying, "Trusting anyone but myself is foolish," which shows us that Harley, quite obviously, since he was literally spending his days experimenting on real human beings and turning them into toys, didn't trust anybody and had to be super careful with any of his secrets. But putting the emails to the side for a moment, going back to the computer station, we are still looking for a username for the system, but where is it? Well, while all of this was going on, randomly some of the mob developers on their Discord server started changing their profiles around a bit to things like eye emojis, twisted versions of their name. This one even changed their name to a bunch of random colors, which might have some meaning, I'm not really sure. But after a bit, all of their profile pictures and banners turned to the color white, and one person's name changed to admin, which after a ton of guesswork led people to believe that this ARG puzzle might be related to the Poppy Playtime employee, Dr. White, because of course their profiles were changed to the color white. An employee who we've seen around Playtime Co quite a bit, as they were one of the people seen in this document presented as a possible candidate for a mysterious Playtime Co project, which Harley ended up beating him out in. But they also show up in chapter 3 in a VHS tape where we hear Dr. White come into a playcare classroom and select a child, Samuel Lee, for an unknown reason, likely for experimentation. And after people made this connection, they asked the email account about Dr. White, first asking, "Who is the admin?" referencing the Discord name, to which the account replied, "Bruno White." Another person asked about the child Dr. White took in his chapter 3 VHS, saying, "What happened to Samuel Lee? Dr. White selected him. Did he get adopted by Dr. White?" And it responded, "Samuel Lee was not adopted." And this is important because while we know that the children in Playcare were being held for experimentation in the future, we do know that the children can be saved and be adopted, according to a Stella Graber VHS in chapter 3 where she was actively working with parents to send them home with an orphan. So this person asked if Samuel was by any chance adopted by Dr. White, but unfortunately they told us that was not the case, and chances are Samuel Lee is one of the experiments lurking around the factory. This person asked the account, "What can you remember?" garnering the response, "Bruno," and nothing more. This person simply said, "Dr. White," getting the response, "Eyes peering from behind a pane of glass. He always did have a certain drive, didn't he? A bad memory. But what good did it do for him? None. He is dead." Suggesting Dr. White was obviously no longer alive, and someone even asked them how long Dr. White has been dead, getting the response, 7 years, which makes sense since we know the ARG takes place in the year 2002, which was 7 years after the Hour of Joy in 1995, suggesting whoever is typing this survived the Hour of Joy while Dr. White did not. Somebody asked what Dr. White's role in the factory was, getting the answer, superior, supposedly. He must have been glad to do this to me, giving us a bit of ambiguity. But to find the next part of the ARG, somebody asked the email, "What is Dr. White's username?" To which it told us it would have been Bruno.White, I believe. It has been so long. And when typing that username into the ARG site, we are then brought to a password page, which is progress. But now, how do we find a password? Well, when people asked the emailers about what the password could be, they replied to everyone saying, "Something snide, my best guess. Some jab at me behind my back." Going on further when asked, "What snide things did Bruno White say about you?" "Nothing creative, spitting my words back like a child. He did this to me." A fan asked, "What did he do to you?" "The footage is archived. More bad memories. I won't dwell on it." So if we know the password was something likely said behind the back of Harley Sawyer as some kind of insult for him, what could the word be? Well, a common thing brought up against Sawyer throughout this ARG is his anger and temperament over the littlest of things. Like we mentioned earlier, there was a whole document at the cafeteria about Harley Sawyer throwing meltdowns over pickles on his sandwich, with the chef saying he was one bad pickle away from doing something bad to the company. And in another letter, we see an employee who now I can only assume is Dr. White joking about Sawyer's aggression again, saying, "Sawyer is quick to remind us that this whole place is one bad day away from a catastrophe," with this phrase highlighted in red. Also repeating the same phrase again at the bottom of the letter. And And this, of course, finally gives us our password, one bad day, which when entering into the site actually works and suddenly brings us to a page reading, "He asked if I still dream. Why? This changes nothing. A broken leash. Caskets. I do. What became of her? Theater incident. Still, it's strange the things that linger." This doesn't make much sense right now, but hang on to it because also while reading this, the ARG website downloads a folder onto our computer called Incident, which contains 6 brand new teaser images. The first one is called LYGP, possibly standing for Elliot Ludwig Young Geniuses Program, a program that, if you didn't know, has been seen throughout the past ARG videos created by Elliot Ludwig, where young geniuses around the world could reach out and visit the Playtime Co toy factory to be scouted out for jobs when they were older, with it being a big plot twist last video that Harley was actually scouted and hired from the Young Geniuses program when he was a child. And in this document, we got another new letter from an unknown Playtime Co employee about Harley in the Young Geniuses program, reading, "This boy is a curiosity among these young minds. He cares little for friendship in the way each of the others seem to, nor does he care to treat his work or his scientific process as anything other than serious. In this boy, I believe I sense a drive unlike any I've seen, and he has the smarts to match. If I might just be a tad selfish here, he is exactly who I hoped this program would attract. But despite not caring for his comrades' company or the fun of our program, he did take an immediate and very noticeable interest in me. The boy hardly smiles, save for when the rest of us work on an invention locked in the throes of another grand experiment. I've tried to ask him questions, get a sense for who he is, and while he doesn't say much, from here he talks about home. I get a sense he doesn't miss it. A mind such as his can be quick to isolate itself from its peers, and if not surrounded by kindness, that mind can twist. The way he spoke almost made me sorry for him. But this, doing what we're doing here, with me, he told me was all he ever wanted. I've taken a liking to the boy, and I confess, I hope to keep him around. He's sharp, I think, curious, and fiercely determined. I think we've got something special in him if I'm right. I think he might just be who leads science into the future." So the writer, who we don't know but can infer is probably Elliot Ludwig, since they mentioned that this was their goal with the Young Geniuses program and Elliot was the one who originally invented it, sounds extremely optimistic about Harley Sawyer and his future at the company, which we saw become very true as he eventually worked there. But there were also very notable concerns, like that Harley seemed mostly emotionless and negative, traits we have definitely seen before, as fast forward to the present, he turned evil, creating the Bigger Bodies Initiative. But this also shows that he had an interest in science since a young age, showing a somewhat innocent side to his work as well. However, the next images don't have as much of a silver lining, as the next 4 are labeled as theater, singularly referencing the theater inside of Playtime Co, which is also a map in Project Playtime, first showing some kind of a burned Huggy here, one of the broken theater projectors which you can actually go and find inside of Project Playtime, a burned away candy cat, and an unrecognizable photo or something of some sort that is completely burned and we can't really make out for now. These all, as we mentioned, were labeled as photos from the theater in Playtime Co. And what makes this area interesting is in the red text from before, we see the unknown writer say there was some kind of a theater incident, and this seems to be the leftover remains of said event, appearing to show destruction and burns on all of the evidence, kind of like some kind of catastrophe happened in this location. This is interesting because earlier in the ARG, we learned in a new incident report document that some kind of catastrophic event happened during a tour, the perfect time for people to be visiting a theater, where a child got likely fatally hurt, leading to the tour guide Brendan to beg Playtime Co to not give him fault and not tell the news he was responsible for whatever happened to this child or it would ruin the rest of his life. And while we didn't know and still don't know for sure what this incident was, all of this evidence seems to suggest it might be related to what happened here in the theater. Now, in terms of what exactly happened, we don't really know, but we might get a better idea in the last image called Warning, showing what appears to be some glitched out papers and writing, which brings us to the reveal of possibly the next chapter 4 character. As if you haven't noticed already, it appears like there is some kind of silhouette in this this glitchiness, especially if you look at it from a distance. Now, I've seen people say this is a number of things. Some say it looks like a clown, or most popularly, that it looks like a jester of some sort. Note things like what looks like a necklace here and one of those double pointed hats with the pointy edges and bells on the top. This is also backed up by the last theater photo here, which we still can't really fully make out. However, people have pointed out if you brighten the image and look carefully, you can see what appears to be the silhouette of the side of a jester character, with the scruffled up sleeves here, what looks like an arm here, and the bottom of the jester's hat here. Granted, I should mention that this is all super speculative, and it's completely possible we don't see anything in this image, and we're just matching it with what we want to see. There's actually a term for this, pareidolia, the process where people see things that aren't actually there. I do highly doubt that though, because we've seen in concept art the developers have attempted to make jester characters before, and if they were to have one, it would make perfect sense for them to be in a theater or relating to the theater, since of course that's where people would be entertained, but I'm not sure. For now, this is all up for speculation. But what isn't is that we can see in the background of this image that there is some kind of message written down that's really difficult to read with all of the distortion. And to make things easier, we can use any photo editing software like Photoshop to separate the image into all of its individual colors, red, green, and blue, grayscale the image, brighten it, and flip it around a bit to give us a full clear look at the photo hiding under it, showing what appears to be some kind of panicked writing written on a torn up biology textbook. And the message in question reads, "He took everything. I thought you cared. Nobody cares. Nobody understands. Elliot Ludwig is a soft, pathetic, small-minded backstabber. Nothing more." This seems to be a message to Elliot from presumably Harley Sawyer, because that's what this entire ARG has been focused on, panically writing this on some kind of random paper. Now, this is a very confusing message because, to be honest, we don't really know what Harley or whoever is talking about here. How could have Elliot betrayed them, and what could they have done? I mean, while we don't know for sure for now, I partially wonder if it's somehow related to what happened in this theater incident, since this was all in the same set of files, so it would be really weird for us to get some completely unrelated notes. And maybe later in the ARG, especially with how many clues we've gotten here today, we will get more updates on what this event was, or at least learn why whoever is writing this believed Elliot, the man known for being a do no wrong figure who only cared about pleasing the children, had somehow backstabbed them. And when going back to the emails, somebody tried asking about this Elliot situation, saying, "Why is Elliot a backstabber? What did he do?" Getting the response, "I know what he did. Why is this happening?" Definitely suggesting there might be more to Elliot's story than what meets the eye, especially relating to Elliot's death. As somebody asked about exactly how he died, saying, "Did you kill Elliot Ludwig for your greed and experiments?" Referencing the popular theory that Elliot was an innocent toy maker who was eliminated by the other employees like Harley Sawyer and Leith Pierre, so they could use his knowledge after creating the Poppy doll to make profit, creating things like the bigger bodies, which they use for free factory labor. And they interestingly responded with ... stay quiet. A very suspicious message. So while hanging out in the Poppy Playtime Discord server recently, a developer randomly posted a bunch of mysterious emojis seemingly teasing something happening soon. And following this later that day, the Playtime Co Discord account that in the last video was panically messaging us claiming something had hacked their database made a somewhat odd return, first saying, quote, "We need a favor. We gave instructions. Did you see them?" Quoting an older message we got a few weeks ago for some reason. But what's most notable about this account returning is its profile picture had changed from the original Playtime Co logo to a big gazing eyeball looking very similar to the eye we saw that took over the computer system in the Chapter 4 trailer. Next, it quoted two other old messages from previous ARGs before finally speaking with us, saying, "Ah, now I see. I will give you this warning once and only once. Stay out. Alongside these cryptic messages, now when going back to the original ARG website, suddenly the computer has completely disappeared. You could still enter the terminal using old links, but when going to the default URL, instead we are greeted by a short message in some red text, which you might recognize as the red text we got at the end of the last ARG update that gave us a folder full of images relating to the theater incident. However, now when browsing around the red text, you will see that certain words are clickable, specifically the words dream, why, still, and linger. And when clicking on one of these, say dream for example, we are brought to another new message saying fog everywhere. Is it creeping further? Boiling frog, which might have some kind of meaning, I'm not really sure. But what's important is this time the words it and further are also clickable and again lead to their own separate pages that also have their own selectable words as well that lead to even more pages. Which, if you haven't caught on yet, looking at the top URL, we are clearly doing some kind of maze, where we are supposed to go digging through all of these messages and the clickable words inside of them, taking us to a multitude of different paths. Now, there were literally dozens of message combinations on this website, and most of which honestly didn't really make much sense and were super cryptic. So here, I'm only going to go over the interesting ones, because otherwise we'd be here for hours. And the first one I found intriguing is in one of the combinations, we reach this message that says, scraps like trinkets, the occasional salamander or bat. Probably not many left. This message seems, in my opinion, like it's talking about the Bigger Bodies Initiative and other experiments, saying it was using scraps of different body parts like the occasional salamander or bat, and were possibly running low on material, seemingly suggesting that alongside just using human beings to create these experiments, they might have also been attempting to use animals to substitute for their shrinking supply of human beings, as there were thousands of experiments. This also makes me wonder if maybe the piles of toys we've seen in the Chapter 4 areas were used as some kind of scrapyard for people to take when they needed them. Another interesting one I saw was this message here that lists a bunch of questions on the top, like what is Bruno White's password, and what do you know about experiments 1015 and 1026, which seems to be the user referencing the emails we were sending in the last ARG to the compromised IT domain, where we asked these exact questions. And this user responded to these requests saying, these thoughts, they aren't mine. What kind of sabotage is this? Which is an odd response to say the least, but this does at least suggest the person talking to us here is likely the same person talking to us in the email, who we know is more than likely Harley Sawyer, so an interesting thing to remember for later. Another interesting one is we see the messenger say, fear is your cage, cowardice your cloak, innovation is key. Which, in my opinion, especially if this is Harley talking to us, appears to be some kind of metaphor for death in a way. Saying fear and cowardice are things we hide behind when confronting the idea of passing away, while they say innovation is key, which again points even more to this user being Harley Sawyer, because we know from the Project Playtime Phase 2 trailer released in 2023 that Harley's main goal with the experiments in the first place was to create infinite life, with the term innovation is key meaning innovating and figuring out eternal living is the key to snuffing the flame and fear of death. He expands and confirms this in another message saying, innovation is key. What are bags of temporary flesh and bones? They would not become anything more otherwise. I am merciful. I will save us. Innovation is key. Showing Harley didn't really think he was a villain or anything, but rather was a savior trying to create this eternal life. Plus, there's also a few more miscellaneous messages showing Harley going through the scientific process and trying to make some kind of breakthrough, likely again trying to figure out how to make these experiments live forever. Now, this is all super interesting because if the ARG here is meant to be teasing Harley trying to find eternal life like it seems, and if Harley ended up being successful, which we know he probably was because 10 years after the factory closed, the monsters and even him were both alive and seemed to not age at all, this puts a ton of weight on the popular theory that Harley might be showing up in Chapter 4, but not as a human, as an eternal monster himself. Likely, if true, possibly another toy who hasn't been revealed yet. But moving on from analyzing the messages for now, to solve this maze and find some bigger secrets, first on the start page, we can click on the word dream, bringing up to this page we already read, where we can click on the word it, bringing us to this page saying, I will find it, a little closer each time, light bulb, closer and closer. Again, seemingly talking about Harley getting closer to finding a solution to his eternal life problem. And then when clicking on the highlighted find, we are brought to another page saying, they can see, look away, don't think it from yourself, and a bunch of random text at the bottom. However, when taking this text and plugging it to the end of our URL, we are brought to another new page saying, a good trick. Sometimes where we keep something is more important than the thing we keep. Innovation is key. Then when clicking on where, we reach another page saying, what do you think you're doing here? Clicking U brings us to this page, an array of holes in the wall where the slurry is siphoned, hot tubes, and cool air. The key is innovation. Clicking on holes brings us to this one saying, they can see, look away, don't think it, hide it from yourself. Where we get another URL string here, which when putting in finally brings us to a page saying no, which when clicking on finally takes us to the end of the maze, revealing a brand new chapter 4 document showing a letter to Harley Sawyer reading, Harley, let me begin this with a bit of bluntness, as I know you appreciate not dancing around what needs to be said. Despite how much it pains me, I've decided to remove you from the Young Geniuses program. I didn't want it to turn out this way, Harley. I didn't want to hurt or discourage you. Yours is truly a brilliant mind, probably the most brilliant of anyone I've ever known. Every day I've seen your drive, your determination, and your incessant need for progress. Working with you, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. But even so, I have to be honest with myself and you, because despite all that I see in you, despite all that you could be, there's one glaring flaw in you I can no longer make myself ignore, your lack of humility. Scientific progress should always be to the benefit of humanity. Progress made simply for the sake of progress often winds up hurting us more than it helps. I've tried to temper that in you as I once had to temper it in myself, but it became clear to me that such intrusions on my part only incited your anger. You finally lashed out at me one evening and stormed out of the lab. Don't be soft, Elliot, you said. Progress doesn't care for how anyone feels about it. I knew immediately that you were wrong, but I wasn't sure what to do, what could shift your thinking. I'm agonizing over it. I was reminded of what ultimately changed me, of what gave me the perspective I needed. It was seeing the world and people again, bouncing back from rejection and hardship through connection. In thinking about those days, I'm reminded that rejection can sometimes be the best thing for us. It can remind us why our actions matter and who they're for. Ultimately, I believe it made me a better person, and I have to believe that doing this now will make you better too. So I challenge you to head for home, Harley, and to look at the people around you, to try for a new perspective, to better know why progress matters. One day, I hope you'll understand, maybe you'll even thank me, but even still, I'm sorry, your friend, Elliot Ludwig. So this is an absolute bombshell, because in previous ARGs, we saw Harley Sawyer call Elliot a soft-minded backstabber for an unknown reason, and in my recent theory videos, I assumed it was because Harley Sawyer, who wanted to create things like the bigger bodies out of the orphans and other extreme stuff, was much more blunt and dark, willing to do anything for progress, while Elliot Ludwig was a family man with good morals. And it seems like here I was completely right, as Elliot had to remove Harley from the program not because he wasn't smart, but because he lacked humility and didn't care to use progress for the greater good, something we've known about him for a while. Elliot even suggested to him to take a step back and spend time connecting with family, or basically he told him to go touch grass. This explains why Sawyer saw Elliot as a backstabber, and also interestingly, we saw Leith Pierre in a different document was the one to end up hiring Harley Sawyer as an adult, despite Elliot Ludwig's worries, making me wonder if either Elliot had a change of heart in desperate need, or if this all took place after Elliot had passed away. I don't know. But regardless, while this is all cool, it's only one document. There have to be some other secrets hiding in here, right? Well, yes, but they wouldn't be easy to find. As if we go back over to some of the pages on the website, something I never mentioned is when highlighting the text with your mouse, you could see that on some of them, there are actually numbers hiding in black underneath them. Specifically, there are 10 of them. An 8 here, a 0 here, a 6 here, a 0 here, a 3 here, a 5 here, a 6 here, a 7 here, a 9 here, and a 4 here, giving us a set of different numbers that clearly matter. But the only issue is we have no idea on what order to put them in, since this is a maze and there's no defined way on which order they're supposed to go in. So what do we do? Well, I live streamed this part of the puzzle, and judge from the length of the stream, you can guess this took us hours. But after a ton of guessing and eventually some hints from the developers, we noticed that if we look at the URL of all of these message links, they are all some different kinds of gibberish, which is odd since some of the other links were just named regular words based on the messages. So why did they have them like this, and what could they be hiding in the URLs? Well, long story short, after all of those hours, we found that these messages were hiding under what's called a keyed Caesar cipher. A cipher where you take an encrypted phrase like the words in these URLs, plug in a key word, and then use a cipher solver to spit out the final phrase. But this brings up a new problem. Where will we get a key? Well, if you've been paying attention over the video, you might have noticed on a large amount of these messages, they will say something about innovation being the key, which is meant to be taken literal as in innovation is the cipher key. So when taking all 10 of the URLs with the messages containing the numbers, and then plug them into the keyed cipher solver individually with the key innovation, we could see each one spells out a new number, seemingly giving us the order that each of these numbers in the links are meant to go in from 1 through 10. For instance, on this page that hides in 8, if we take the end of the URL and plug it into the cipher, we get the word 1, meaning it goes first. Then this page with a 0 when plugged into the cipher gives us a 2, putting it second, and so on. When doing this with all 10 numbers, we are finally given a string in order reading 800-364-6597, which, as we mentioned, happens to be 10 digits, the same amount of digits as a phone number. So naturally, when going ahead and calling this number on your real phone, we were given a super interesting message.
You know why we're all here. Let's skip the formalities. Eddie, the cleanup. What's the progress?
We'll be in the clear by the week's end, and it goes without saying, but word of this doesn't breathe beyond the factory's walls. Not as anything concrete. I've made sure.
Has Lockhart come forward with any information? Even the number of bodies?
No, nothing yet.
Those poor people. Did we really have to...
did what was necessary, Miss Graver.
Of course.
The real question here is, when we find who's responsible, whose mistake this is, what do we do with them?
Oh, you mean after I've gotten my hands wrapped around their neck? I figured I'd just give it a nice squeeze until they stop squirming around. Sound like a plan?
Lay, think rationally here. We need to...
If you like having your job, Sherrod, beat it. We're busy.
It's me.
Oh, step on in, Mr. Lockhart. My constituents and I were just discussing some sensitive business.
Afraid I'm here to complicate that there.
Well, don't leave us in suspense. What half-wit, soon-to-be dead man made this mistake?
Dr. Harley Sawyer.
So in this, we hear employees Leith Pierre, Eddie Ritterman, and Stella Graber all talking about some kind of incident they were clearly extremely angry about, trying to figure out who was responsible for it so they could punish them themselves. Then, while having the conversation, they get a knock on the door from Jared Lockhart, an investigator at Playtime Co who was involved in figuring out what happened to Theodore in Chapter 3's ARG, and also was the one in charge of scouting out Harley Sawyer in this document here. So he comes in, figuring out who was responsible for the event, and tells them all it was Harley Sawyer before the phone call ends. Now, in terms of what they are talking about here, they don't give enough concrete evidence for us to really solve for sure. However, Stella did mention she was worried of there being multiple bodies resulting of the incident, likely being people who did not survive, and judge from the past couple of ARG updates referencing some kind of theater incident where something went wrong in the theater, causing a bunch of things to get destroyed. I think it's pretty safe to at least guess that this phone call could be them talking about the aftermath of said incident, which would confirm that there were in fact casualties of the event, and Lockhart had concluded that it had to be Harley Sawyer's doing. I don't know if that means he was responsible directly, or if he means because Harley Sawyer was the one who made the toys, and we theorized in my last video the new Jester character is likely the one who caused the theater incident. I'm not sure, but with how much they're mentioning it, it definitely seems like it's going to be a big focus of Chapter 4. But aside from that, it's interesting that seemingly all of the higher-ups seem extremely furious with Sawyer for causing this event, and we already know how Elliot Ludwig felt about Sawyer, so over time, as the ARG has progressed, we've seen Harley become more and more isolated from even his peers he was working with, building a super interesting dynamic for Chapter 4, as Harley doesn't seem to just be an enemy to the children and the experiments and of course the player, but now is becoming an enemy to the employees as well. So the other night, out of nowhere, when going onto the main ARG website, centraldomainaccess.net, suddenly everything about the site seemed to have been deactivated. The audio was completely removed, all of the puzzles stopped working, and typing on the computer, no matter what you said, responded with connection terminated, seeming like the computer website was fully shut down. However, you might have already noticed it, but on the top right here, we can see a couple of different Google Drive links strung together, which when searching up give us two brand new teasers. First, there is this one showing an unreadable glitched out photo where in it we can see what appears to be a faint I up here and a word saying were here, which will matter in a second. Another interesting thing is you can convert this message into a text file, which when reading hides a secret message saying with regards Sawyer, suggesting whatever this image is, it's coming from Harley Sawyer to us. But also over on the second Google Drive link, we are actually given an MP3 file called recording, which when playing at first seems meaningless as it just plays an audio recording of the phone call conversation from the last ARG update of employees Elliot Ludwig, Stella Graber, and Eddie Ritterman discussing some kind of incident that made them furious before they learned that Harley Sawyer was the one responsible for it, which is believed to be referencing the theater incident we learned about in previous updates. However, what's different about this call audio is at the beginning and throughout the whole incident, we hear what sounds like somebody sitting down and nervously shifting throughout their chair.
You know why we're all here?
Then at the end, we hear this super obnoxious loud noise. Now, first, regarding the chair sound, since obviously we were able to access this audio of the higher-up employees, this implies there had to be somebody in the room actively recording the conversation, and in this tape, the audio we are hearing sounds like it is somebody sitting down and listening to said conversation, who, judged from all of the nervous shifting, is likely somebody like Harley Sawyer himself, since he saw in this call that all of the higher-up employees were literally threatening violence against him for causing this incident, and it likely intimidated him, which is interesting because we've sort of been learning throughout this entire ARG that the employees didn't really like Harley all that much, just like everybody and every bigger buddy, and it makes you wonder how Sawyer might have reacted to seeing this information, assuming it's him. But most importantly, with this audio, there's this high-pitched sound at the end, and if you followed this ARG and others in the past, you probably recognize this as a spectrogram encryption, where we could take this audio and visualize it using a spectrogram, of course, and could see clearly there is some kind of hidden message hiding right here at the end. The only issue is it's super blurry, and no matter what kind of settings or filters you put over the audio, this is still really hard to read. So after literally hours of people trying to decipher what this message is trying to tell us, they eventually discovered this message here isn't actually in English or anything like that, but rather is in Greek that spells out this sentence through the Greek alphabet, which we can naturally put through translating software to give us a hidden message. Now, this part is a bit weird because the translation you get depends wildly on the site you use. Google's base site gives us some gibberish, Google Translate's independent site gives us the father of the child, and DeepL gives us the baptism of fire. So there's a multitude of different messages depending on what you look at. I'm not sure if any of these are correct or if the Greek text here is even accurate, but I thought at least I'd point it out, although definitely take it with a major grain of salt because we have no confirmation which, if any of these are correct and what they'd even mean anyway. But moving on from the audio, as for the first teaser, the same person who found the Pianosaurus outline from this previous image by editing the hex code to remove the glitchiness Drigel, saw this teaser had a very similar glitchy top layer, and after again editing the hex code a bit, he gave us this image showing the silhouette of some kind of spiked object, an eyeball symbol here, which we've seen multiple times throughout trailers and ARG clues now, and a message saying you were warned, which is super cryptic. We also, with a bit more editing, have gotten a slightly fully finished version of this render as well, giving us a better look at the full image. Now, obviously, the main focal point of the photo is this weird object on the left, but what could this even be? I've seen some people think maybe it's Pianosaurus, who has slightly similar points here, although I I highly doubt this in my opinion. They look basically completely different. I've also seen other theories of people thinking this could be the unrevealed Jester character or a first look at the full prototype body, while some are also saying this could be another new character that we haven't ever seen before, because recently they've been dropping character reveals on us like crazy. So I guess what's another one? It looks like it could maybe be the back or side of some kind of unseen monster, assuming this is true, but I personally, in my opinion, doubt both of these claims, and to me this actually looks like it could be some kind of a machine. In my opinion, the thing in the image looks super mechanical and not organic. It doesn't really look like anything we've seen from the monsters before, but to be honest, I'm not really sure. It's really just too cryptic for me to make any solid judgments. However, what I am sure of is after solving all of these puzzles, one of the developers sent us a message congratulating everybody, saying, "Thank you guys for playing. That was so much fun. We can't wait for you all to see the rest of what's to come as we ramp up to launch," confirming this is actually the very end of the ARG and there is no more for us to discover. Now, this was obviously a big shock to everyone because this kind of came out of nowhere, but the dev Anthony went more in depth on the ending and the future of Chapter 4 in other messages, like when Dridgel here expressed worries about Chapter 4 being multiple months away with us getting no new info. He said, "Don't worry, haha, we aren't just going to be radio silent until release, it's just the end of the ARG." And when someone replied to that saying, "So y'all got more stuff in store up until the release?" he again messaged, "Of course we do, haha, smiley face. You'll just have to wait and see." Now, I don't know if Anthony here is just referencing upcoming trailers, because we obviously know we're going to get trailers in the future. The game isn't just going to shadow drop, or if there are going to be more kinds of teasers in the future, but that's a very interesting update. Although this is kind of weird and bittersweet, because while this ARG in my opinion was the best one yet, they mentioned wanting it to be more collaborative and interactive, which it definitely was. This ending was super weird because it just came out of nowhere. Usually there's a big reveal or something at the end, like a trailer or VHS, but this time we literally got none of that. We never got answers or really even hints on the theater incident or any of the other documents and mysteries we were hoping to get answered in the ARG, which is maybe a good thing because it means, unlike the Chapter 3 one where we already knew most of the lore about Playcare and its cult going into the chapters since they revealed a big chunk of it in the ARG, this time it seems we'll get answers in the actual game, but people were still pretty disappointed with this news because it was super abrupt and didn't really end in anything massive. But if you can't afford to wait, before shutting the website down, they also gave us some updates on the Chapter 5 ARG as well. I'm not joking. As in reflection, first off, regarding the ARG update where we had to dig through the big maze to find numbers and build the phone number, people complained it was way too hard, which the devs responded to saying, "Sorry if it was a bit frustrating, y'all, trying to crank up the dial, but we may have gone a little too abstract. Good learning opportunity, hopefully y'all still enjoyed it," which likely means future ARGs will be a bit easier than what we saw there. And fast forward back to today, somebody said in the Discord, "Dude, imagine the next ARG though," since the devs have been super adamant on making each ARG bigger than the last one, which they responded to with, "We already are," meaning they are already planning Chapter 5's ARG. So if you guys are already ready for another one, this basically confirms there will be one and that they are already actively planning. But this was a super fun ARG. Shout out to everybody who stuck around and watched them through my videos. It means the world. And make sure to subscribe because even though this is the end of the ARG, this is simply the start of Chapter 4's full release.